Have you ever wondered how the story of one man, exiled in a foreign land thousands of years ago, still resonates so deeply today? The book of Daniel, written during one of Israel's most challenging periods, the Babylonian exile, is not just an ancient narrative. It's a story of unwavering faith, divine intervention, and the ultimate triumph of God's sovereignty. From fiery furnaces to lions' dens, Daniel's life reveals a God who works through the impossible to display his power and fulfill his purposes. Imagine living in Babylon, a city that was more than just a political superpower. It was a spiritual juggernaut, boasting temples to false gods, immense wealth, and a culture deeply rooted in idolatry. The Hanging Gardens, one of the wonders of the ancient world, symbolized its unmatched splendor. Yet for Daniel and his companions, Babylon was not just a land of exile. It was a place of spiritual testing. Here they faced immense pressure to conform to a culture that sought to erase their identity as God's people. And yet, Daniel's faith stood firm. Whether it was his refusal to eat the king's food, his calm resolve when faced with a fiery furnace, or his steadfast prayers that led him to the lion's den, Daniel showed the courage to trust in God no matter the cost. Even in the face of death, his trust never wavered. The miraculous events that followed, like the shutting of the lions' mouths, declared to the world that the God of Daniel was the one true sovereign over kings and kingdoms. Before we continue, I want to ask you to leave a like on the video to support us. And if you enjoy this kind of content, subscribe to the channel and also click the notification bell. God bless you. What's remarkable about the book of Daniel is how it weaves these dramatic rescues into visions of the future. From interpreting dreams that humbled kings to receiving prophecies that revealed God's eternal kingdom, Daniel's story shows how God's hand guides both the present and the future. The writing on the wall, the prophetic visions of the four beasts, and the promise of an eternal kingdom are more than historical accounts. They are declarations of God's control over history and his ultimate plan for humanity. So, what does this mean for you? Daniel's story isn't just a tale of ancient miracles. It's a living testimony that the God who saved him is the same God who works in the lives of his people today. It's a reminder that even in a world that feels chaotic or oppressive, God is sovereign, faithful, and present. Are you ready to step into the courts of kings, the heart of prophecy, and the depths of unshakable faith? Together, let's uncover the profound truths of the book of Daniel, a story that challenges us to trust in the God who reigns supreme over all. The story of Daniel unfolds during one of the most critical moments in the history of Israel, the Babylonian exile. This wasn't just a military defeat, it was the result of a long history of disobedience to God. Prophets like Jeremiah and Ezekiel had repeatedly warned the people of Judah about their idolatry, social injustices, and neglect of God's covenant. They worshipped false gods like Baal and Molech, practiced corrupt rituals, and allowed greed to replace mercy in their dealings with the poor. Jeremiah, in particular, prophesied that their refusal to repent would lead to 70 years of exile under foreign rule. Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 10. The fall of Jerusalem in the year 586 before Christ marked the fulfillment of this prophecy, with Nebuchadnezzar as God's instrument of judgment. Babylon wasn't just any empire, it was the dominant world power of its time, renowned for its wealth, military strength, and architectural wonders like the Hanging Gardens. Yet, it was also a hub of idolatry, with temples dedicated to gods like Marduk and Ishtar dominating the city's skyline. When Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem, he didn't just destroy the temple. He took sacred objects from the house of God and placed them in the temple of his own deity. This act symbolized not only Babylon's military victory, but also a spiritual triumph in the eyes of the Babylonians. For the Jewish exiles, this was a crushing blow, challenging their faith in the sovereignty of God. Among the captives taken to Babylon were the best and brightest of Judah's youth, including Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Nebuchadnezzar's strategy was clever. Instead of simply enslaving these young men, he sought to assimilate them. As described in Daniel chapter 1, verses 3 to 7, they were selected for their physical appearance, intelligence, and aptitude for learning. They were educated in the language and literature of the Chaldeans, an elite training designed to transform them into loyal servants of the empire. Even their names were changed to reflect Babylonian deities. Daniel became Belteshazzar, meaning Bel, protect the king. The cultural clash went deeper than education or names. The young men were also offered rich food and wine from the king's table, a gesture that seemed generous but came with strings attached. This food was likely dedicated to idols, making it unclean by Jewish standards. Daniel's decision in chapter 1, verse 8, to refuse the king's provisions wasn't just about diet, it was a profound act of faith. He resolved to honor God, even in the small details, trusting that obedience would bring favor. His choice of a simple diet of vegetables and water, while counterintuitive, became a powerful testimony when he and his companions appeared healthier and wiser than the others after 10 days of testing. Theologically, this period underscores God's sovereignty over human history. Daniel chapter 1, verse 2, explicitly states that the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. This wasn't a sign of God's weakness, but of his purposeful plan. Even Nebuchadnezzar's victories served a divine purpose, to refine his people and demonstrate his ultimate authority. For modern readers, this truth resonates deeply. How often do we interpret setbacks as failures, when in fact they might be part of God's greater plan for our growth and transformation? For Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, this foreign land represented more than physical captivity. It was a battleground for their faith. How would these young men remain faithful to their God amidst relentless pressures to conform? Their journey began with an act of quiet resistance that would set the stage for their extraordinary testimonies. After their arrival in Babylon, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego faced a critical moment that tested their faith. They were selected for the Babylonian king's elite program, a training meant to transform them into loyal servants of the empire. As described in Daniel chapter 1, verses 3 to 5, Nebuchadnezzar sought the brightest captives, those of noble lineage, wisdom, and potential. However, this privilege came at a cost. They were given new names, introduced to the language and literature of the Chaldeans, and served lavish meals from the king's table. But there was a deeper challenge hidden within these privileges. The food and wine offered by the king were not merely sustenance. In Babylonian culture, meals often included offerings to idols, and consuming them signified participation in pagan rituals. Moreover, this diet likely violated the Jewish dietary laws outlined in the Torah. For Daniel, accepting this food would mean compromising his devotion to the God of Israel, the Ancient of Days. It wasn't just about following rules, it was about preserving his identity and faith in the midst of cultural pressure. Daniel chapter 1, verse 8 states, "But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself." This quiet yet firm resolve is a lesson in spiritual conviction, even in seemingly small matters. Daniel didn't confront the officials with rebellion or hostility. Instead, he demonstrated remarkable wisdom and tact. He approached the steward respectfully and proposed a test. He and his companions would eat only vegetables and drink water for 10 days. At the end of the trial, their appearance would be compared with others who consumed the royal food. This proposal wasn't just about dietary preferences, it reflected Daniel's trust in God's sovereignty. He believed that faithfulness to God would yield better results than indulgence in the king's delicacies. The outcome was nothing short of extraordinary. After 10 days, Daniel and his friends appeared healthier and more robust than their peers who ate the king's provisions. Daniel chapter 1, verse 15. This wasn't simply the result of a healthy diet, it was a visible manifestation of divine protection. By honoring God, Daniel and his companions not only maintained their physical health, but also gained favor with the steward and the king. This act of faithfulness reinforced the idea that God blesses those who choose him, even when it seems inconvenient or risky. This moment also demonstrates the power of community. Daniel wasn't alone in his resolve. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood with him, forming a unified front of faithfulness. Their collective obedience served as an inspiration to each other, showing that faith often flourishes in fellowship. This unity is a powerful reminder for modern believers. Surrounding oneself with others who share similar convictions can make it easier to stand firm in challenging situations. This foundational act of faithfulness prepared Daniel and his companions for even greater challenges. Their unwavering commitment would soon lead to miraculous displays of God's power in situations that tested their very lives. From fiery furnaces to lions' dens, their faith and resolve would illuminate the sovereignty and protection of the Ancient of Days. The story takes an extraordinary turn when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, is troubled by a vivid and mysterious dream. This dream, recorded in Daniel chapter 2, not only disturbs the king, but also exposes the limitations of human wisdom and highlights God's sovereignty over history. Nebuchadnezzar, in his desperation, summons his magicians, astrologers, and sorcerers, demanding an impossible task. They must not only interpret the dream, but also recount it to him without him revealing its content. The demand reveals the futility of Babylonian practices. As the Chaldeans respond in frustration, "There is not a man upon the earth who can show the king's matter." Daniel chapter 2, verse 10. This sets the stage for Daniel and the God of heaven to intervene. The dream itself is both mesmerizing and unsettling. Nebuchadnezzar saw a colossal statue made of different materials, a head of gold, a chest and arms of silver, a belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet partly of iron and clay. As the king watched, a stone, cut without hands, struck the statue's feet, causing the entire structure to crumble into dust. The stone then grew into a mountain that filled the whole earth. This imagery encapsulated the rise and fall of human kingdoms and the establishment of God's eternal dominion. Yet without divine insight, the dream's meaning was a mystery, even to the wisest men of Babylon. When Daniel learns of the king's decree to execute all wise men due to their failure, he responds with faith and wisdom. He requests time to seek God's revelation and immediately calls upon his companions, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to join him in prayer. Their collective plea for mercy is answered when God reveals both the dream and its interpretation to Daniel in a vision during the night. Daniel's first response is one of praise, declaring, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his." Daniel chapter 2, verse 20. This moment highlights the power of prayer, faith, and reliance on God's sovereignty in impossible situations. When Daniel stands before Nebuchadnezzar, he humbly deflects credit for the revelation, declaring, "There is a God in heaven who reveals secrets." Daniel chapter 2, verse 28. He explains that the statue represents a succession of kingdoms. The head of gold symbolizes Babylon, with its wealth and grandeur under Nebuchadnezzar. The chest and arms of silver represent the Medo-Persian Empire, known for its strength and dual nature. The belly and thighs of bronze point to the Greek Empire, famous for its military conquest under Alexander the Great. The legs of iron signify the Roman Empire, unmatched in power and durability but harsh in rule. Finally, the feet of iron and clay reflect later divided kingdoms, strong yet fragile, unable to achieve unity. The stone, representing God's kingdom, signifies a power not of human origin, destined to destroy all other empires and stand forever. The significance of this dream transcends Nebuchadnezzar's time. It reveals a God who not only orchestrates history, but also establishes a kingdom that cannot be shaken. For modern readers, the message is clear. No matter how powerful earthly systems appear, they are temporary. Only God's eternal kingdom endures. This truth invites believers to place their trust in God rather than in fleeting human institutions. Whether facing political uncertainty, societal instability, or personal challenges, Daniel's interpretation offers hope rooted in the sovereignty of God. Nebuchadnezzar's reaction to the interpretation is remarkable. This proud and powerful king, overwhelmed by the clarity of the revelation, falls prostrate before Daniel and declares, "Truly, your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets." Daniel chapter 2, verse 47. He promotes Daniel to a high position and acknowledges the superiority of the God of Israel, though his acknowledgement is fleeting. This moment is a testament to how God's power can penetrate even the most hardened hearts. The story also emphasizes the importance of humility and dependence on God. Daniel didn't claim the revelation as his own achievement, but credited the Ancient of Days, showing that true wisdom comes from above. For modern believers, this serves as a reminder to approach challenges with prayer, humility, and trust in God's timing. Whether seeking guidance in decisions, understanding difficult situations, or navigating personal struggles, Daniel's example teaches us to rely on God, who still reveals mysteries to those who seek him. This pivotal moment in Daniel's life solidifies his position in the Babylonian court. But it's only the beginning of God's extraordinary displays of power. The next test of faith will unfold in the fiery furnace, where Daniel's companions will stand firm in their devotion, even when faced with the ultimate threat. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace remains one of the most powerful narratives of faith in the Bible. Found in Daniel chapter 3, it illustrates the cost of remaining faithful in the face of overwhelming pressure. At the heart of this story is King Nebuchadnezzar's pride and his desire to unify his empire under a single act of worship. The king constructed a massive golden statue, 60 cubits tall and 6 cubits wide, and demanded that all peoples, nations, and languages bow down and worship it whenever they heard the sound of music. This wasn't just an act of loyalty to the king, it was a declaration of allegiance to his gods, a direct challenge to the faith of the people of Israel. For Nebuchadnezzar, the statue represented more than power. It was an attempt to consolidate his empire through a shared act of devotion. In the Babylonian worldview, kings were often seen as divinely appointed figures, sometimes even semi-divine themselves. By forcing everyone to bow, Nebuchadnezzar sought to solidify his rule and exalt himself as the ultimate authority. This backdrop highlights the stakes for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Refusing to bow wasn't just defiance, it was a bold declaration that their loyalty lay solely with the God of Israel. This decision could have seemed reckless to onlookers, but to these men, it was an act of unwavering faith in the sovereign God. When the music played and the crowds fell to their knees, the three men remained standing. Their refusal wasn't born out of rebellion, but out of deep conviction. Nebuchadnezzar, upon hearing of their defiance, was furious. He summoned them and gave them one last chance to comply, warning of the fiery furnace that awaited them. His question was piercing. "Who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands?" Daniel chapter 3, verse 15. This wasn't just a threat, it was a challenge to the very power and existence of the God of Israel. Nebuchadnezzar's arrogance mirrored humanity's tendency to overestimate its control and underestimate the sovereignty of God. The response of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is a testament to their faith. They declared, "If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up." Daniel chapter 3, verses 17 and 18. Their statement acknowledges God's power to save, while also expressing their willingness to face death, if that was his will. This was not conditional faith, it was absolute trust in God's plan, regardless of the outcome. Nebuchadnezzar's fury reached its peak. He commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual, a symbolic gesture meant to underscore the severity of the punishment. The strongest men in his army were tasked with binding Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throwing them into the blazing furnace. The heat was so intense that it killed the soldiers carrying out the king's orders. Yet within moments, something miraculous occurred. As Nebuchadnezzar gazed into the furnace, he was astonished. "Plus, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God." Daniel chapter 3, verse 25. This divine intervention wasn't just about deliverance, it was about God's presence in the midst of the fire. The 4th figure in the furnace, often interpreted as a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ or an angel, demonstrated that God doesn't merely observe his people's trials, he walks with them through the fire. When the three men emerged, they were completely unharmed. Not a hair was singed, their clothing was intact, and there wasn't even the smell of smoke on them. This undeniable miracle forced Nebuchadnezzar to acknowledge the power of their God. There is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Daniel chapter 3, verse 29. He proclaimed, issuing a decree that no one in his empire should speak against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This story holds profound lessons for modern readers. The furnace symbolizes the trials and pressures believers face today, whether in the workplace, in relationships, or in society. Refusing to bow to societal norms that conflict with spiritual convictions often comes at a cost. Yet, the story reminds us that God is present in the fire. His protection might not always look like immediate deliverance, but his presence provides strength, comfort, and ultimate victory. For those facing challenges, the response of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego serves as an example of courage, to trust God even when the outcome is uncertain. Moreover, the miraculous deliverance reveals that God's purpose extends beyond his people's survival. His power displayed in the furnace transformed Nebuchadnezzar's understanding, at least momentarily, and served as a testimony to all who witnessed it. For believers today, standing firm in faith amidst trials isn't just about personal integrity, it's a witness to the world of God's power and presence. The story of the fiery furnace, then, is not just one of survival but of God's glory shining brightest in moments of deepest adversity. This act of faith and deliverance would mark a shift in Nebuchadnezzar's perception of God, leading to further humbling experiences as God continued to reveal his sovereignty over the proudest hearts. The story of Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the great tree, found in Daniel chapter 4, captures one of the most dramatic displays of God's sovereignty over human pride. At the height of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar ruled over the magnificent empire of Babylon, a city known for its towering walls, sprawling gardens, and economic power. Yet, his greatness led him to believe that all his achievements were the result of his own might. This pride set the stage for a divine intervention that would humble the most powerful man on earth. In the dream, Nebuchadnezzar saw a massive tree that stretched to the heavens, visible to the ends of the earth. The tree provided shelter for beasts and birds and food for all creatures, symbolizing the reach and influence of Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. But the dream took a startling turn. A heavenly messenger, described as a watcher or holy one, commanded the tree to be cut down, its branches stripped, and its fruit scattered. Only the stump and roots were to remain, bound with iron and bronze, left to endure the elements. The messenger declared that the heart of a man would be replaced with the heart of a beast, and 7 times would pass before the tree's meaning was fulfilled. Daniel chapter 4, verses 13 through 16. Deeply troubled, Nebuchadnezzar called for his advisors, but none could interpret the dream. Once again, Daniel, known as Belteshazzar, was brought before the king. Daniel's response was one of compassion and respect. As he hesitated to deliver the troubling interpretation, he explained that the tree symbolized Nebuchadnezzar himself, whose greatness had reached unmatched heights. However, the king's pride would lead to his downfall. The decree from heaven was clear. Nebuchadnezzar would be driven from human society, living like an animal, eating grass, and enduring the elements. This punishment would last for 7 times, interpreted as 7 years, until he acknowledged that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomsoever he will. Daniel chapter 4, verse 17. Daniel did not stop at interpreting the dream. With boldness, he urged the king to repent and turn to righteousness, saying, "Break off your sins by righteousness and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor." Daniel chapter 4, verse 27. This plea showed that the judgment was not inevitable. God offered Nebuchadnezzar a chance for redemption. However, the king's pride proved to be stronger than his fear of the vision. 12 months later, while surveying the splendor of Babylon from his palace, Nebuchadnezzar declared, "Is this not great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty?" Daniel chapter 4, verse 30. In that instant, The words of the vision were fulfilled. Nebuchadnezzar was driven from his throne, and his appearance became beast-like. For 7 years, he lived among the animals, eating grass and enduring the dew of heaven. His descent into madness was not only a punishment, but also a reflection of how pride can strip away humanity and reason when left unchecked. At the end of the appointed time, Nebuchadnezzar's reason was restored, and with it came a profound transformation. He lifted his eyes to heaven and declared, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth and his ways justice, and those who walk in pride he is able to abase." Daniel chapter 4, verse 37. This public acknowledgement of God's sovereignty stands as a powerful testimony of how divine judgment leads to humility and restoration. This event marked a turning point not only in Nebuchadnezzar's life, but also in his understanding of God's ultimate authority. His humbling serves as a timeless reminder that all human power is subordinate to the will of God. The legacy of this event would echo throughout Babylon, but it also sets the stage for the rise of Belshazzar, whose story of pride and judgment takes an even more tragic turn, as revealed in the mysterious writing on the wall. The story of Belshazzar's feast and the writing on the wall is one of the most sobering episodes in the book of Daniel. It marks the sudden and dramatic end of the Babylonian Empire, showcasing God's ultimate justice against pride and irreverence. Found in Daniel chapter 5, this narrative unfolds during a moment of arrogance and indulgence under King Belshazzar, who failed to learn from the legacy of his predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar. Belshazzar, the son or descendant of Nebuchadnezzar, though historical records suggest he may have been co-regent with Nabonidus, held a lavish banquet for 1,000 of his lords. The setting was one of excess, with wine flowing freely as Belshazzar's court indulged in revelry. Yet, this wasn't just any feast. It became a symbol of open defiance against the God of Israel. In an act of sheer irreverence, Belshazzar ordered that the sacred vessels taken from the temple in Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar be brought to the banquet. These were holy items, consecrated for the worship of the Most High God. Yet Belshazzar and his court used them to drink wine while praising the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Daniel chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. This act of sacrilege revealed Belshazzar's heart. By desecrating the sacred vessels, he not only mocked the God of Israel but also exalted himself as untouchable, believing his kingdom was secure. It was a moment of ultimate arrogance, a stark contrast to Nebuchadnezzar, who, after being humbled, had acknowledged the sovereignty of God. Belshazzar's actions were a deliberate affront to divine authority, and his pride set the stage for a swift judgment. As the festivities continued, a supernatural event halted the revelry. A disembodied hand appeared and wrote mysterious words on the plaster of the palace wall near the lampstand. The sudden appearance of the hand shocked the gathering. Belshazzar, who moments earlier had been full of arrogance, was struck with terror. The text vividly describes his reaction. His face turned pale, his thoughts alarmed him, and his knees knocked together. Daniel chapter 5, verse 6. Desperate to understand the meaning of the writing, he summoned Babylon's enchanters, astrologers, and soothsayers, offering them rewards of a royal robe, a golden chain, and the position of third ruler in the kingdom if they could interpret the message. Yet, as in Nebuchadnezzar's time, none of the wise men could decipher the words. Daniel chapter 5, verses 7 through 9. At this moment, the queen, likely the queen mother, entered the banquet hall. She reminded Belshazzar of Daniel, a man known for his exceptional wisdom and the spirit of the holy gods. During Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Daniel had proven himself capable of interpreting dreams and solving enigmas. Acting on her advice, Belshazzar summoned Daniel to interpret the writing. Daniel, now an elderly statesman, stood before the king, unimpressed by the promised rewards. Before interpreting the writing, Daniel rebuked Belshazzar, recounting the humbling of Nebuchadnezzar. He reminded the king of how God had disciplined Nebuchadnezzar for his pride, driving him into the wilderness to live like a beast until he acknowledged that the Most High rules the kingdom of men. Daniel chapter 5, verse 21. Daniel's rebuke was pointed. But you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this. Daniel chapter 5, verse 22. This statement underscores the willful nature of Belshazzar's defiance. He had knowledge of God's sovereignty but chose to disregard it. Finally, Daniel interpreted the writing, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Each word carried a weighty message, Mene. God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. This was a declaration that Babylon's time as a world power was over, as determined by God. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Belshazzar's character and reign were judged and found deficient. Peres, or Upharsin, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. The once mighty Babylonian Empire would now fall into the hands of its enemies. Daniel chapter 5, verses 25 through 28. The weight of these words sealed Belshazzar's fate. That very night, the prophecy was fulfilled. The Medo-Persian army, under the command of Cyrus the Great, invaded Babylon. Historical records suggest they entered the city by diverting the Euphrates River and slipping under the city walls. Belshazzar was killed, and the once mighty Babylonian Empire fell, as prophesied. Darius the Mede assumed control, marking the transition to the Medo-Persian rule. Daniel chapter 5, verses 30 through 31. This story is a stark reminder of God's justice and the inevitability of his plans. Belshazzar's arrogance and disregard for the sacred brought about his downfall in a single night. His actions contrast sharply with Nebuchadnezzar's eventual humility, showing that while repentance can lead to restoration, persistent defiance results in judgment. For readers today, the story warns against the dangers of pride and irreverence toward God. It also serves as a testament to the unshakable sovereignty of the Almighty, whose authority transcends all earthly kingdoms. As Babylon falls, the stage is set for the rise of the Medo-Persian Empire, and with it, new trials for Daniel, such as the perilous challenge of the lion's den, where his faith once again takes center stage. The story of Daniel in the lion's den, recorded in Daniel chapter 6, is a masterpiece of faithfulness and divine intervention. Set during the reign of Darius the Mede, this account highlights the unshakable character of Daniel, the political intrigue of a foreign court, and God's ability to deliver his faithful servant. It demonstrates how integrity and devotion to God transcend human schemes and laws. After the fall of Babylon to the Medo-Persian Empire, Darius reorganized the vast kingdom by appointing 120 satraps under the supervision of 3 presidents. Among these presidents was Daniel, whose exceptional qualities made him stand out to the point that Darius planned to set him over the entire kingdom. Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. Daniel's rapid ascent in the government sparked envy and resentment among the other officials. His incorruptible character left them with no grounds to accuse him of wrongdoing, leading them to plot against him, through the one area where they could exploit his steadfastness, his devotion to the God of Israel. The conspirators, aware of Daniel's commitment to daily prayer, devised a plan to trap him. They persuaded Darius to issue a decree that no one in the kingdom could petition any god or man except the king for 30 days. The punishment for disobedience was death in the lion's den, Daniel chapter 6, verses 4 through 9. This decree, irrevocable under the laws of the Medes and Persians, was not merely a show of royal authority, it was a calculated political maneuver to eliminate Daniel. The rigidity of this legal system, which even the king could not alter, was central to their scheme. It was this immutability that placed Darius in a dilemma once Daniel's defiance was exposed. When Daniel learned of the decree, he continued his daily prayers, undeterred. 3 times a day he knelt in his house with its windows open toward Jerusalem, praying and giving thanks to God. Daniel chapter 6, verse 10. This act of devotion held deep significance. Facing Jerusalem symbolized Daniel's unwavering hope in God's promises of restoration, as outlined in Solomon's prayer during the dedication of the temple, First Book of Kings, chapter 8, verses 46 through 50. Even in exile, Daniel's actions affirmed his identity as a servant of the Most High, demonstrating his unbreakable connection to his faith and heritage. As expected, the conspirators found Daniel praying and immediately reported him to Darius. Bound by the decree, Darius had no choice but to enforce it, though he labored until sunset to find a way to save Daniel. Daniel chapter 6, verses 11 through 15. This detail reveals the king's deep respect for Daniel, setting him apart from previous rulers like Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, whose actions were often driven by pride or arrogance. Despite his efforts, Darius was forced to command that Daniel be cast into the lion's den, expressing hope that Daniel's God would deliver him. Daniel chapter 6, verse 16. The scene in the lion's den is a striking display of God's power. That night, God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths, protecting Daniel from harm. The narrative emphasizes the miraculous nature of this event, as lions, known for their ferocity, were rendered harmless. Early the next morning, Darius rushed to the den and called out to Daniel, asking if his God had delivered him. To his immense relief, Daniel responded, proclaiming his innocence before both God and the king. Daniel chapter 6, verses 19 through 22. This deliverance not only demonstrated God's faithfulness, but also his ability to intervene directly in the affairs of men. The conspirators' plot backfired dramatically. Darius, enraged by their deceit, ordered that they and their families be thrown into the lion's den. Unlike Daniel, they did not escape unscathed. The lions devoured them before they hit the ground. Daniel chapter 6, verse 24. This act of retribution underscored the seriousness of their treachery and the justice of the Medo-Persian system when dealing with such schemes. Following Daniel's miraculous deliverance, Darius issued a decree proclaiming the greatness of the God of Daniel, declaring him the living God whose dominion is eternal and whose kingdom will never end. Daniel chapter 6, verses 25 through 27. This proclamation echoed the earlier recognition of God's sovereignty by Nebuchadnezzar, marking yet another acknowledgement of the Most High by a foreign ruler. The story of Daniel in the lion's den is more than just an account of survival. It is a demonstration of God's supremacy over human authority and the futility of opposing his faithful servants. As Daniel's story progresses, his steadfast faith continues to be tested, not only by personal trials, but also by the weight of apocalyptic visions that reveal the unfolding of God's divine plan through history. The apocalyptic visions in the book of Daniel, spanning chapters 7 through 12, are a profound revelation of God's sovereignty over history and his ultimate victory. These visions, full of symbolic imagery, uncover not only the rise and fall of empires, but also the spiritual battles behind the scenes and the promise of an eternal kingdom under the rule of the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man. This section unveils Daniel's role as a prophet of God's eternal plan, providing clarity to his visions and the historical and theological context behind them. The vision of the four beasts rising from the sea, Daniel chapter 7, is one of the most well-known apocalyptic images in the Bible. Each beast represents a successive kingdom, starting with the lion with eagle's wings, symbolizing the grandeur and eventual humbling of Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar. The second beast, a bear raised on one side, represents the Medo-Persian Empire, known for its duality and massive conquests. The leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads represents Greece, reflecting the swift military campaigns of Alexander the Great and the eventual division of his empire among his generals. The final beast, with its iron teeth and 10 horns, represents Rome and its unparalleled power and cruelty. The additional little horn that arises, boasting arrogantly, is often associated with rulers who oppose God and his people, such as Antiochus Epiphanes, a precursor to later oppressors. This vision culminates in a scene of divine judgment, where the Ancient of Days sits on his fiery throne, surrounded by countless heavenly beings. Daniel chapter 7, verses 9 through 10. The Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven, is presented before him and receives an eternal dominion and kingdom. Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 through 14. The term Son of Man, often associated with Jesus Christ in the New Testament, underscores his dual nature as both divine and human, and his role as the ultimate redeemer and ruler. This prophecy not only highlights the temporal nature of human empires, but also the unshakable nature of God's kingdom. The vision of the ram and the goat in Daniel. Chapter 8 provides a more focused prophecy. The ram, with two unequal horns, represents the Medo-Persian Empire, while the goat with a prominent horn symbolizes Greece under Alexander the Great. Daniel chapter 8, verses 3 through 7. The shattering of the goat's horn signifies Alexander's untimely death and the subsequent division of his empire among four generals: Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. From one of these divisions arises a small horn, Antiochus Epiphanes, who desecrated the temple in Jerusalem and persecuted the Jewish people. This prophecy not only predicts historical events with remarkable accuracy, but also foreshadows the rise of future oppressors. The prophecy of the 70 weeks in Daniel chapter 9 is perhaps the most intricate of his visions. During a time of prayer and fasting, Daniel receives this revelation from Gabriel, who outlines a divine timeline for the fulfillment of God's promises. Daniel chapter 9, verses 20 through 27. The 70 weeks, often interpreted as 70 sets of 7 years, are divided into 3 periods. 7 weeks, 49 years, mark the rebuilding of Jerusalem after the exile. 62 weeks, 434 years, lead to the arrival of the Messiah, a prophecy fulfilled in the life and ministry of Jesus Christ. The final week points to the culmination of God's plan, including the cutting off of the Messiah and the desolation brought by an oppressive ruler. Chapters 10 through 12 expand on these themes, delving into the spiritual battles behind earthly events. Daniel encounters Gabriel, who explains that his prayers had been delayed because of a cosmic struggle with the Prince of Persia, a demonic force opposing God's purposes. Michael, the archangel and protector of Israel, intervenes to ensure the message reaches Daniel. Daniel chapter 10, verses 12 through 14. This glimpse into the spiritual realm highlights the unseen conflicts that influence human history and underscores Daniel's role as an intercessor. Chapter 11 provides an intricate prophecy detailing the rise and fall of rulers and empires, culminating in the rise of a blasphemous king who desecrates the temple and opposes God's people. Daniel chapter 11, verses 31 through 45. This ruler, often identified with Antiochus Epiphanes, also serves as a type for future antichrists who will rise in opposition to God's kingdom. Finally, chapter 12 offers a vision of the resurrection and the ultimate destiny of humanity. Daniel is shown a time of great tribulation, after which the faithful will awaken to everlasting life, while others will face eternal shame and contempt. Daniel chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. This promise of resurrection affirms that God's justice extends beyond this life and provides hope for those who remain steadfast in their faith. Daniel's apocalyptic visions reveal a profound truth. History is not random but guided by the sovereign hand of God. Empires rise and fall, spiritual battles rage, but the eternal kingdom of the Ancient of Days will prevail. As Daniel's narrative draws to a close, these visions set the stage for understanding the broader scope of God's redemptive plan, which culminates in the fulfillment of his promises to his people. The life of Daniel is an extraordinary account of faithfulness, integrity, and unwavering devotion to God, set against the backdrop of political intrigue and spiritual opposition. Living as an exile in a foreign empire, Daniel's ability to remain steadfast in his beliefs while serving under multiple kings and empires is a testament to the transformative power of a life fully surrendered to God. His story offers timeless lessons, rich in historical and spiritual significance. From the very beginning, Daniel exemplifies integrity and faithfulness to God's law. His refusal to eat the royal food and drink the wine from Nebuchadnezzar's table, Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 through 9, was not a mere dietary preference, but a deliberate act to avoid defilement. The king's food was likely offered to idols, or prepared in ways that violated the dietary laws given to Israel. This small act of resistance was deeply symbolic. Even in exile, surrounded by a pagan culture, Daniel chose obedience to God over conformity. His respectful negotiation with the eunuch in charge of his care demonstrates his wisdom and humility, setting a precedent for godly engagement in a secular world. Daniel's consistent life of prayer stands as one of his most defining traits. He maintained a disciplined prayer routine, kneeling 3 times daily, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, Daniel chapter 6, verse 10. This practice was not just a ritual, but a profound declaration of his hope in God's promises, particularly the restoration of the temple and the people of Israel. Praying toward Jerusalem reflected Daniel's alignment with Solomon's prayer during the temple dedication, First Book of Kings, chapter 8, verses 46 through 50. This act of faith connected Daniel's daily life to the greater story of God's covenant with Israel, reminding him and us of God's faithfulness even in exile. Daniel's relationship with kings like Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, and Darius underscores his exceptional character and divine wisdom. Though an outsider, Daniel rose to prominence by interpreting dreams and providing counsel rooted in his dependence on God. His interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the great statue, Daniel chapter 2, revealed successive empires, each weaker than the last, culminating in the establishment of God's eternal kingdom. Despite his elevated position, Daniel remained humble, always attributing his wisdom to God. Daniel chapter 2, verse 28. His influence extended beyond his personal achievements, serving as a testimony to the kings of Babylon and Persia of the sovereignty of the God of Israel. Courage is another hallmark of Daniel's character. He demonstrated remarkable bravery in the face of laws designed to entrap him, such as the decree forbidding prayer to any god except Darius, Daniel chapter 6. Knowing the consequences, Daniel continued his prayers, prioritizing his relationship with God over personal safety. His composure when thrown into the lion's den reflected his unwavering trust in God's ability to deliver him. This courage was not born of recklessness, but of a deep conviction in God's power and faithfulness, a lesson that resonates across generations. Daniel's longevity in service is another remarkable aspect of his story. Spanning the reigns of Babylonian kings like Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar to the Medo-Persian rulers Darius and Cyrus, Daniel maintained his integrity and relevance despite the political upheaval. This is particularly noteworthy given that transitions of power often resulted in purges of the previous administration's officials. Daniel's continued presence highlights both his exceptional competence and the divine favor that preserved him. His faithfulness was not confined to one moment or ruler, but was a lifelong commitment that impacted multiple empires and left a legacy of godliness. The life of Daniel serves as a blueprint for navigating a world hostile to faith. His story reminds us that small acts of obedience, a disciplined prayer life, and courage in the face of trials can have profound and lasting effects. Daniel's unwavering devotion to God, even when surrounded by opposition, continues to inspire believers to remain faithful, trusting in the sovereignty of the Almighty. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to leave a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel to keep following more biblical stories like this one. Your participation is very important to us, and we want to hear your opinions and suggestions. May God bless you.